How's it going, everyone? VenomousStare here with an incredible TvT. It just simply put does not get better than this when it comes to Terran versus Terran. This is game 2 of a best of 5, and these games were played at Blizzcon, so this is really as good as it gets. Two top-tier Korean pro gamers facing off against each other. In the bottom right of King Sejong Station we have Byun, the defending GSL champion. And in the top left, we have a very popular Terran player named TY, aka Baby, who has spent time on the team KT Rollster, and it appears as though both players are going to be doing mirroring builds. A little bit of gas first action. And Byun will take his second gas. In game 1 we saw Byun take his second gas quicker than TY, so be interesting to see if that happens again, as TY sends an SCV out to start to look around. So as things heat up, I want to talk about Byun and what he brings to the table as a player. I think that Byun is someone who is extremely exciting to watch. He's one of these rare players who can micro so exceptionally that you see very common scenarios that you see all the time, like, oh, it's 2 Reapers and a Hellion versus 2 Reapers and a Hellion, and you think you know what's going to happen, and Byun will just go God mode and absolutely out micro his opponent, as we see an Expo coming down for TY. Factory coming down for Byun, and if we look in camp TY, I think he's about to make one. There it is. So TY does have this expansion. This is a huge variation. If he can use this to get himself a lead, this will be a big deal. And Byun cleans up the scouting SCV, and he's going to run across the map. And it looks like Byun's going to take his own Expo here, so TY has a little bit of a macro advantage here since his base is about halfway done. One of the most interesting things that you should know about Byun is whenever he goes into micro engagements, even if the numbers are even or if he has a disadvantage, he can just brute force his way through and really show his opponent what he is made of and do things that a normal StarCraft 2 viewer really doesn't think is possible or would be possible at first glance. Starport on the way for TY. He's elected to finally take his second gas. Pumping double marine out of reactor, which it looks like that is something that Byun is going to start doing soon as well. Notice Byun built this little depot up by this cliff. This is smart because usually people will try to run a Reaper over here by this cliff. The time for Reapers has passed, but this is a good depot spot. Some people even elect to do like a little wall off up here, which whenever you consider in TvT your depot placement doesn't matter a whole lot. If you can put your depot in certain positions to get advantages, then you might as well do it. As we see, Byun is going to get a little bit of an advantage. Wow, picks off a Hellion. That's a big deal because it is a mirror matchup. Now Byun has a Hellion and TY does not have a Hellion. Now the reason that this is a big deal is because in a mirror matchup, since you do use so many of the same units, number advantage is significantly more important than it is in non-mirror matchups. But TY does have a Cyclone. This is very good defensively, but TY loses high ground vision and is unable to finish picking off that Reaper. And suddenly Byun has a medevac full of units going to reinforce his push. TY is going to run around with the Cyclone. Now the Cyclone is good defensively when it can focus on one unit, but it really needs a little bit of supporting cast, because if it gets focused it can have some trouble. Byun is starting to siege up on this high ground. No combat shields here yet for TY, so this tank is going to do a ton of damage. Byun's going to scream forward here. TY trying to siege his own tank, but Byun gets his own shot off first, and suddenly TY can't repair because of the Reaper grenade. So Byun showing off his exceptional micro, and with some SCV pulls and a little 1 marine flank, TY will barely hold. Now a big part of that was his Viking advantage. If we go to Vikings, neither one of Byun's had been across the map at the moment, so TY had that little split second of defender's advantage, and despite Byun's micro, he was able to hold. Both players are making a command center at their third base at about the same time. Byun's going to take double gas around the 520 mark. And notice he started double Viking production already. TY has matched him with his own double Viking production. So this is what happens when two players are exceptionally talented and are both playing at a very high level. As the Cyclone is very, very low here, Byun micros it away. You see a lot of similarities, almost as though they're doing mirroring builds without even really knowing what each other are doing. So that's nice to see, and we can see TY has done that little wall in I was referring to earlier. Byun is going to scout around with Marines, see what he can see. If we go to Vision, Byun wants to reach these feelers out. I'm guessing these are going to the towers. Byun is finally starting his stim pack here. He's adding barracks 2 and 3. And of course, yes, he does take the towers. And he's going to run out with these Vikings. Now this is powerful because if you have a Viking advantage and you start to kill your opponent's Vikings, it will just snowball out of control so easily. First of all, you're really only going to be producing out of one reactored starport for a long time, both players. So if you can get that Viking advantage and continue to poke and prod, it's hard for your opponent to come back, which is the pure Viking. But more importantly, if you start to lose all of your Vikings, then you're susceptible to things like tank evac pressure and drops. So once you start to kill the Vikings, you really start to gain control of the matchup. And Byun is someone who can transition a little edge into a big edge because of his exceptional micro. More add-ons being added here for Byun, as well as his 5th barracks. Pretty much the same thing going on here for TY, although he's a little bit behind. And TY sees where Byun's production is relative to his. 2 tank evacs get loaded up for Byun, 2 tank evacs get loaded up for TY. Ooh, but Byun tried a little Viking flower there, but his Vikings were just out of the range of the flying tanks. And if Byun had gotten lucky and caught the tanks over the dead zone, TY could have lost the game off of that. But as it stands, Byun was out of position just by an absurdly small amount. And it turns out to be TY who gains the slight advantage. TvT is a very finicky matchup. We saw Byun was doing a little patrol command with Vikings. If Byun's doing that a little bit further this way, then the 2 tank evacs just fly into those Vikings and die almost instantly. We can see TY is trying to do a little bit of pressure here. He wants to siege up down here and attack this mineral line most likely, but Byun has tanks of his own. And TY is going to try to pressure forward, scan ahead, see what he can find. He knows that for at least a moment he probably has the Viking advantage, and the Viking advantage is very important when it comes to siege tank based play. But Byun's going to stem forward, try to run in, try to use tank evacs of his own, and now that Byun has a Viking pop out, he's not in bad shape, and Byun's going to do a drop of his own here behind the mineral line of TY, and suddenly TY's multitasking is being pressured and taxed here as Byun just picks up and runs away, but at what cost? 9 SCVs, that's at what cost. And Byun swings back in the income lead. Notice that the fact that TY had to pull workers is really hurting his income. He doesn't have adequate gas saturation. There he goes, he fixes it. But remember, every time you harass your opponent in StarCraft 2, you're forcing them to react and make a decision. In this case, TY's decision was only slightly belated because of what he was doing on this side of the map, and it caused him to lose 9 SCVs. And that's something that's very interesting to watch when it comes to Byun, is he's constantly pressuring his opponent and forcing them to make decisions. Whenever you watch a Byun replay, a lesser StarCraft 2 player might be under the incorrect guise that Byun just gets lucky, or his opponents just make a lot of mistakes and play shitty. It's not really the case. Byun's micro is so good and his multitask is so good that he can force his opponents to make mistakes that they would not usually make. we can see Byun is starting to siege this lower base of TY. I wish I could zoom out even further. And Byun has the siege tank advantage in terms of positioning. If we go to units, Byun does not have the siege tank advantage in numbers, but because Byun is being aggressive and forcing the fight to take place where he wants it to take place, TY is kind of forced to decide, well, do I attack, do I defend? If I defend, how do I defend? Because I can't just drop my tanks all right here. They'll be instantly bombarded by the 5 superiorly spread out tanks of Byun. So TY is just going to stem up here and probably cancel this base. Now Byun's doing a big attack down here as well. He doesn't have a whole lot to defend. This might turn into a base trade, and Byun's not going to be able to hold this. TY has a ton of bios screaming forward, and suddenly Byun is in dire straits. He's going to run up into the third of Byun, retreat with some of his army, leave a little bit on the outside, and suddenly this is a base trade scenario. The natural gets lifted up for Byun, but suddenly TY is defending valiantly at his third, and Byun has lost a ton of workers. TY was ready for the attack at his third, unlike the attack at his natural, and Byun pushes the attack at his natural away. But if we go to structures, we can look and see that Byun has lost an orbital command. So that puts TY in a commanding position in this game. Now Byun is an incredible micro player. He's not out of it yet. He also has very good macro. If anyone can weasel their way back into games, it's Byun. He has done it so often in his career with his obnoxious micro, and now that he has god tier macro to back it up, I don't expect that this is going to be a situation he'll be scared of. But TY is going to try to take his 4th base here as Byun pushes over to his 3rd. TY has to do a good job of always staying on top of his siege tank positioning, because all it takes is one little moment. Byun's going to siege on top of this 4th base plateau and cancel the planetary fortress making, and just like that, TY's 4th base has been abated. It has been temporarily delayed, and that's due to the siege tank positioning as TY picks off one of Byun's tank evacs. But Byun canceling this 4th base is a big deal, because as soon as this turns into a PF, it's almost infallible, almost indestructible. Byun's going to siege down here. He's always poking at his opponent. He's always prodding at his opponent. He's never allowing TY a moment of respite, even though he was down a base, as this little orbital at his natural just finished. He's just starting to mine again as we see TY overextending a bit, losing some Marines. Notice Byun is down in supply, but it always looks like he has the bigger army. His macro is great despite the lack of income, and TY has the macro advantage. But because of the way that Byun is constantly pressuring and moving his units, it appears as though Byun is constantly keeping TY on the back foot. You know, TY is doing a little drop over here. This is great. This is an example of what he should be doing, trying to keep trying to keep Byun on the back foot. Suddenly Byun doesn't let TY live for a second. He's not going to let TY have a moment to catch his breath. TY is going to pick up and drop into the main of Byun. As we see, Byun, of course, lifted his base over to his natural. I was wrong. He didn't build a base. And suddenly, Byun's going to scream in forward here, drop tanks down onto this natural expansion. The natural is picked up for TY. TY has some units here running forward, trying to defend, but Byun has screamed forward and is now in the main and has TY trapped in this weird kind of chokehold where these siege tanks are sieging not only the production but the ramp. So TY has a lot of units, but he can't really adequately defend. He has some tanks out here. Byun is trying to push forward again, bringing more tanks forward, and can Byun do it? As after that base died, he was in dire straits, but TY is going to stem forward here with a ton of bio, and Byun might not have known how much stuff TY had waiting in the wings, and suddenly it looks as though TY might have stabilized temporarily, as TY does have a planetary fortress up at this third. Remember, Byun's economy is very low. Sure, he has about the same amount of workers as TY, but I can't stress how important this 4th base is. I know it's really like a 3rd or really even a 2nd, but It's established at the location that you usually see a fourth base, and it's a planetary fortress. The fact that Byun really is only mining from 2 locations, both of them almost destitute, both of them orbital commands, is a big deal. He's going to try to siege up at the same spot, choke holding off TY at the same spot, but TY has a huge army here. He might just be able to brute force Byun and reclaim his base, but Byun does have a lot of tanks here. This is very scary for TY. Despite everything that's happened in this game, the supplies are almost even. TY scans the base down low for Byun, sees that, oh, Byun doesn't even have a fourth. He is very committed to this attack. Notice Byun is starting to reinforce down low. He's scanning ahead. Byun does not want to be cut off. And TY is going to counterattack himself. This is a crazy back and forth game. Byun says, okay, that's my cue. Your attack means that I press my attack forward even more. TY is going to scream forward here with his own version of Marine tank. Byun might even snipe an orbital here. TY has nice siege tanks laid about, and Byun is going to find it hard to close out this game. 3 tanks are on the high ground here. TY has sniped a base with tons of SCVs. Byun is in dire straits. He's trying to fly off again, but look at that. Byun kills a base of his own. This game is coming right down to the wire. It will be hard for Byun to break TY because of the tank count here, although it does favor Byun. Oh, what the hell do I know? It's too close to call. Byun's going to drop more tanks up onto the high ground. TY had a nice defensive position, but Byun's just going to brute force his way up into the main of TY, as TY had a ton of units that were out of position, and now he's continuing to siege the main of TY. TY being forced to lift. TY might even kill this last remaining base of Byun. This is an insane game. Does he see it? No. Yes, he does. So Byun's last base is going to be seen in Byun GG's. So that little base at the 4th, I guess you could call it, this middle location planetary for TY was really the crux of the game. Byun had a great little siege, but at the end of the day, we're going to run through and see what happened at the end. So Byun had tanks up on this high ground, but he couldn't really close the deal. He didn't have enough supporting cast or income. Remember, he's not mining at all. So he has to get it done with what he had, and quite simply, his units were too withered down to make this final push. He had a lot of tanks, and he almost won at the end of the day, but not even Byun can make this work. TY, simply put, had a nice little defender's advantage, and the fact that Byun was not able to mine really was the sealing deal in this issue, and by this issue I mean this game. Because the fact that Byun couldn't mine meant that really his micro was limited, because the amount of units he had at his disposal were limited. So if you enjoyed that, that was game 2. I'm casting lots of StarCraft 2 games. Subscribe for more.